Hello, my name's Paul Jepson, and it's a pleasure to be with you online and to present on the topic of how to make rewilding investable. Rewilding signifies a new ambition in conservation, an ambition to move beyond a defensive focus on nature protection towards a proactive agenda of nature recovery. But rewilding needs land. And all land is an asset, and that asset needs to generate some form of value for someone. And in particular, if we're going to scale rewilding, if we're going to expand nature recovery, we need to find ways to generate forms of financial value, revenues, to maintain that land, to develop that land, and to create employment for people associated with that land. And that aspiration, that need, if you like, that ambition is sometimes what we professional rewilders call the holy grail of rewilding. How can we make rewilding into a revenue generating proposition that can attract investment for the transition from whatever form the land is currently in to a more rewilded state, and to invest in the infrastructure or human resources which we'd need to make rewilding an enterprise, if you like, on that. So just before I get into that, if you like, let's just maybe I could just say what my perspective on what rewilding is. And I particularly like a definition of rewilding which Chris Sandham originally put out and which I've sort of expanded a little bit. And that's thinking of rewilding as spaces of innovation, both physical spaces, lands, but also intellectual spaces of innovation. And innovation in advances in science, in ecological science, economic science, social science, innovations in practice, and what we're going to talk about today, innovations in finance. But rewilding is really characterised by a desire to restore and recover ecosystem processes and functions, often through the introduction of what we call functional species, such as large herbivores, so that the ecosystems can become what sometimes is termed self-willed, that we're not prescribing an end state. The ecosystems can find their own end state, obviously within the constraints of what is feasible in our complex societies, and steered by humans as ecosystem engineers to generate the forms of value which we desire. Rewilding is an approach to ecosystem restoration and landscape recovery. And I do stress a approach. It's just one approach which is there, and there is other valid approaches. But it is an approach which is showing promise, or considered to be a very promising approach in terms of restoring ecosystems, enabling ecosystems to re-expand from the rather flattened state we've pushed them into. And it's also considered a promising approach for delivering what are called nature-based solutions. So these may be natural climate solutions, they may be solutions to rural depopulation or the decline of rural economies. And in the UK, a lot of what we're thinking about is how rewilding can offer new enterprise opportunities for landowners who, in the next 3 to 7 years are going to see massive reductions in subsidies. I mean, in particular, the basic farm payment. And a rewilding approach to land management, it's sort of guided by a number of scientific land management principles. And this slide just gives a quick overview of those to give you a flavour. We look at expanding ecosystems on 3 axes, the ability of organisms to disperse across ecosystems, restoring forms of natural disturbance in landscapes, which are really crucial to creating microhabitat diversity or niche diversity on it, and restoring or re-expanding the trophic complexity of ecosystems. And this is often about reconnecting the dynamic interactions between large herbivores or guilds of large herbivores and vegetation, which sort of creates these messy, mosaic, multicoloured landscapes, which then form the basis for biological abundance, biodiversity, and of course humans' engagements with landscape, which are linked to some of the revenue generating opportunities. So that's just a sort of quick overview into sort of an introduction, if you like, to how we see rewilding. But what I really wanted to talk about in this presentation is how rewilding, or the re-expansion of ecosystems, the recovery of ecosystem function and processes, can generate revenues for landowners. And there's really three buckets of revenue, or in my mind there is, which sort of create the opportunity to do this. And these are illustrated in this schematic. So one bucket, an emerging bucket if you like, is the revenues from payments for ecosystem services. And these can be of two types. One, there are public payments for ecosystem services. And in the UK, these are going to come from the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which will pay farmers to manage their land to produce environmental public benefit, such as natural flood management on it. And then there may be grant schemes associated with that for instance, for tree planting to increase our tree cover. And then there's another area which I'm going to really talk about, and it's an emerging area, which is private markets for what are called natural capital credits. Now, you're probably all familiar with these in terms of carbon credits, but currently they're expanding to include nitrate credits, biodiversity credits, and also we at EcoSulis are developing a rewilding token. At the top of this schematic is, in some ways, the classical produce of farming. It's always been crops and livestock and so forth. And then there are premium markets for some of these products, such as wild meat, which can come from rewilding. And then the other area, which of course has been around for ages, is leisure activities, visitation, ecotourism. And again, this is really expanding, partly the staycation effects of COVID, and always also the rise of demand for experiential recreation. And I'll talk about that as well. But let's talk first about these emerging markets for natural capital credits. And I just want to preface what I say by saying that this area is really fluid at the moment. There's been a huge amount of sort of innovative thinking and activity during lockdown, and of course we've all been able to speak to each other more easily over Zooms and Teams and so forth. And I should also say that the relationship between these emerging private markets for natural capital credits and the public payments through ELMS is not quite resolved yet. Whether there can be double payment, whether you can receive money to restore nature through the ELMS scheme and then sell some of the outputs of that restoration, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, on private markets. There may be a feeling that that's sort of double dipping, and the principle that if markets can pay for public goods, they should do that, and public money should pay for public goods which the market can't cover. There is an area though there which is really interesting in thinking whether the public funding should pay for the transition from a more sort of commodified cultural based enterprise to a nature based enterprise on that. Now, these markets for natural capital credits are really they're coming from a number of areas, but one of the things is really corporate demand for the ability to achieve their aspirations to become not only climate neutral but now nature positive. And I think this is one of the big shifts in the last year. Corporations for a long time have been looking at how they can become climate neutral by looking through the supply chains and then looking how they can offset carbon emissions, which is just impossible to do in the business areas. But since the growing recognition of the nature and ecological emergency, corporations or leading corporations are starting, okay, so how can we become nature positive as well? We want to become nature positive. We want to sort of contribute not just to offsetting the harm we're doing, but actually contributing to these bigger public aspirations of leaving nature in a better place than we found it, which of course is very much part of the ambition of our 25-year environment plan. And one of the interesting things here as well, which I think is driving this interest in nature-related credits, is that for a corporation to go carbon neutral, they come to this point where they can't offset anything. So then they're saying, okay, let's buy those offsets. But carbon, of course, it's just a ton of carbon either sequestered or not released. And that's it's a global commodity. You can buy that ton of carbon. You could buy it from the UK, or you could buy it from Sumatra. And of course, actually, the cost of producing those changes in carbon, those tons of carbon, are different elsewhere. So financial managers in corporations will very rightly say, well, if we need to offset this, surely it's cheaper to buy our carbon from peatland restoration in Sumatra. Why should we buy carbon in the UK, which is much more expensive? And this is where there's the recognition is actually that if you combine carbon credits with rewilding credits or nature credit, you get contextual value to it. And the contextual value, or the value of nature credits, is different from that pure commodity value of carbon. Nature and nature positiveness actually has a value which relates much more to brand value, reputational value, strategic human resource value. And if we can bring the two together, it contextualizes the carbon and then add value to the carbon, or justifies that higher value of carbon. I think there's another big trend we're beginning to see. Up until now really, carbon credits and to some extent things like nitrogen credits and peatland carbon credits, they're based on codes and proxies and so forth. And these are sort of okay, but the financial markets and maybe also the corporate buyers are now looking for credits which are based on what we call direct measures of ecosystem change or carbon sequestration. And this is becoming possible with technology, because technology is enabling us to better and more cost effectively measure change in carbon. That's the easy one in a sense. And the challenging one, which we're working on at the moment, change in biodiversity and ecosystem integrity, that functional side of ecosystem. And this very much relates to developments in fintech, in financial technology, where if you're an investor and you're investing, for instance, in a transport company, you can now actually get direct measurements of what the fuel efficiency of the vehicles is. You're not sort of relying on lookup tables of if you've got these trucks, it's going to have this fuel efficiency. You can measure it directly. That's the direction of travel, and that's what we're seeing the direction of travel needs to be in this area of natural capital credits, or the nature positive side of it there. I think there's a third development we're seeing in markets, which sort of relates to that last one I've said. And currently, carbon or markets for natural capital credits more generally, they're brokerage markets where a broker will go to a landowner and say, look, we can assess your credits according to these standards with these technologies, your credit potential it might be, and then we can find a buyer for you, and we'll take a commission on that process. And that can be a little bit, can work very well, but it can be a little bit, how do I know I've got the right broker, all of this sort of business. And now we're moving to transactional markets in it, where there's platforms where you can sell your credits on them. Those credits are often related or recorded on a blockchain-based registry, and this gives much more transparency and flexibility. They can be resold and so forth. So there's some important developments going on in markets in that natural capital credit market. And there is some risks with this, and maybe some of you listening to this sounding, this is sounding what? We're just monetizing nature recovery, or we're trying to monetize rewilding. I'm not sure I'm totally comfortable with that. And I have to say, perhaps I'm not totally comfortable with it, but there is a pragmatism that this is how the world works, that we've got to get investment in it, and investment markets work in this, and of course we live in a capitalist economy. But we need to go into this with our eyes open. And I was really taken by Mark Carney's Reith lectures, which were last year or earlier this year, anyhow, whenever they were. And he was really reminding us of important things. First, that value, the markets turn value into price. So when we're thinking about value, there's a price component to it. What is the price of a particular value, a particular commodity, or a carbon credit in markets? But that type of value and values, what are we aspiring to do? They are distinct. So we've got the price we might have in a market, but the values of carbon neutrality, meeting the 1.5 degree ambition, and the value of nature restoration, leaving nature in a better place. These are values, these are societal aspirations, and they're distinct but related to price on it. But also, when we're creating markets, in this case for natural capital credits, we have to understand that creates meanings, it creates forms of public discourse, and these can actually shape our collective morality, of judgments of right and wrong. So they're in interplay all the time. And then the pricing of goods and the pricing of services in markets, if we just focus on that, it can flatten the social values, what we aspire to do. And I think this is this broader public debate we're in at the moment, where we're saying, wow, we've had this 30 years of neoliberal capital, and it's all been, markets can deliver public goods. And you know what, as a society, we're not feeling that we're delivering, our collective aspirations. There are downsides to it. So not wanting to go on about this too much, but the point I'm trying to make is that the development or design of markets, those markets for natural capital credits, and those income streams, and that mobilization of private finance into rewilding, that just thing we've got to do is that, if you're a landowner, many landowners, you need to sell something in markets. We've got to design that wisely and think about those sort of points which Mark Carney was making. So we at EcoSulas and my innovation team has really been trying to get a head around this and thinking about how to do it. And we're going along the line of and preparing to introduce what we call a rewilding token, or a token. And we're using the word token just to make that conceptual difference between offset credits, the offsetting of harm. Because those offset credits, if you're just going for those, you could just be managing your land to maximise carbon credits. That would take us sort of down plantation carbon forestry. Well, that's not different from plantations, which, have caused environmental difference in the future. Or if you're saying, look, I just want to maximise biodiversity credits, that could take us down the line, or farmers down the line, of just creating patches of standardised vegetation communities, which might be nice and look nice, and they will have some value, but they're not going to achieve the value which a more rewilded approach could take. Again, it's just dealing with the flattening of ecosystems rather than the re-expansion of ecosystems. So the concepts of a rewilding token here is to say, okay, so let's think about what an ecosystem is. So an ecosystem is all of these interactions between different components of it. And all of those interactions produce what we call emergent properties. So carbon sequestration is an emergent property in it. So let's take that out and price that emergent property. Biodiversity, the diversity of cultural species, or the diversity of biological abundance. Those are emergent outputs. Okay, so we could have a credit, an offset credit there, which would offset the harm we do when we do development. Nitrates fall into that. The ability of ecosystem processes to depollute water or whatever. But then let's have another type of token, which is looking at the underlying state of the land asset in it. And this is where the rewilding token is, and we've got a set of indicators based on some of that science I just showed earlier, which can baseline the state of an ecosystem and then not totally predict, but model the improvements in those interactions between the basic functioning attributes of ecosystems and land management rewilding practices in it. Now that gives us a different opportunity, because that gives on the nature positive side, gives people or corporates the opportunity to invest in the improvement of our underlying ecosystem assets, which ultimately is the social purpose, the values type of things we're doing. But it's recognizing that investors, be they corporate investors, investments markets, or people such as you and me who want to do some impact philanthropy, we really want some measures of what's going on. We don't want to just base, on good words and trust and marketing PR. So it's providing those underlying metrics which can be reported in ESG reports, or which we can, we can track how these things are doing on our phones and our investments and so forth. So that's broadly the concept of the rewilding credit, which is attracting that investment, not ownership, but in the underlying rewilding assets. And sometimes I think about this, just to use an analogy of this, I think about it, I started my career in Manchester in the 70s when there was a lot of urban regeneration going, and there was these big factories from the industrial age, which used to be cotton mills or whatever, and they were defunct. But you had that fundamental asset there. So that's the asset of the analogy, or the analogy of land. And then you could invest in that asset, the repurposing of that asset, if you like, in one of two ways. For instance, you could turn it into flats, and you could say, right, my units there, which are going to generate revenue or rental units, or you could convert it, regenerate it into a cultural centre. You say, okay, so my revenue streams from that might be ticket sales, might be franchises for the cafe or whatever. So that's there. But the underlying asset and the ability of that asset to function that's where I'm going to bring in a more socially minded investment to do that. And the people who have done that are going to be proud of having that stake in it. So the sorts of value or returns they want in their investment are not just monetary returns, or they're not the monetary returns. They're a stake in that sort of, that pride in, I've been involved in that, I've invested in it. Oh, I might get a bit of privileged access to it, or whatever. And I can tell my friends about this. I can be, I can not brag about, maybe brag about it a little bit, but I can just feel that pride. And that's the concept of the rewilding token. So perhaps enough about the hard economics. Now let's move on and start thinking about another revenue stream which can connect with those tokens and credits which I've just been talking about, or can be independent. And actually quite a lot of early stage rewilding initiatives in the UK are thinking about this area, which goes into this line of visitation, hospitality, recreation, or so forth. And when I'm thinking about what is the income generating opportunity from rewilding initiatives for this, I often take as my lead this quote from a Tech Futures book by Kevin Kelly, which I really love. And somewhere in it might actually even be in the introduction, he poses this really lovely question of, in a world where everything is becoming copyable, streamable, shareable, and rentable, what will become valuable? And I'm sure we all recognise this world we're in it. We always recognise it when we're, thinking about, what to buy your parents or your brothers or sisters or your dad or whatever. What are you buying from their birthday now? You can't buy them an album. They just stream the music or whatever. It's, what do you buy? And of course, the lovely answer that Kevin Kelly gives to this, or I think the very pertinent answer, is that's what's starting to become valuable in society is personalised, embodied experiences. And I think we recognise this when we look at the cost of, or how the change of, that music analogies go. it used to be that an album might cost you, 12 quid, 10 quid or something, and going to the gig costs you 25 quid. Now it's, going to a gig will be 80 quid, or going to a festival, it can be several hundred quid. It's the experience where the value is, not the actual product, the album of it. And I think Rewilding really offers opportunities, rewilded landscapes for experiences on there. This is what people are doing. But when we're thinking about how we might capture that, there's different areas you can capture revenue in it. But just conceptually, it's understanding that, what is an experience? How do we design or produce experiences, and high quality experiences in it? And part of that is a process of assembly. And for me, technology is very much part of this, but it's reducing your input costs, expanding the experience by assembling different things which are already out there, and I'll talk in that at the moment. But fundamentally for me, it's thinking about these, how you can deliver what sort of constitutes an experience. So these are processes of othering. When we pay for something, we want to get out of our normal world. And, for a lot of us, this is getting out of our urban world and our world of standards and health and safety and blah, 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 all of these sorts of things, this sort of constraining world sometimes we live in. It's about processes of becoming, becoming more chilled, becoming more skilled, becoming more informed, becoming more social or whatever. Always thinking about how experiences can help with processes of becoming. Process of immersion seems to be very much in trend, if you like, at the moment. The whole rise of wild swimming is a really immersive sense of that. But the ability just to immerse yourself in something and something different, be this a beautiful natural setting, be it just immersing yourself in a gentle activity of foraging for blackberries or whatever, or immersing yourself in cooking or wildlife photography or whatever. Just that, concepts of the flow, that very relaxing state you can get into when you're doing something, but it's not too challenging or stressful, but it's using your mind as well and in a different place, and so forth. And then I think other sort of process-based themes which are really important to the experience we might be generating through rewilding, and then obviously selling, processes of storifying storifying the experience, but also giving stories which people can share, with their friends over Instagram, or so forth, and which can be part of going home from that experience and just having lots of stuff to chat about, basically, and just enrich our social lives, through that. Okay, so that sounds all a bit abstract, but if we're a land manager, or if we're thinking about investing in rewilding, how might that come to be? And here I just sort of give you a little bit of an illustration of that on it. So. One side of things is which is big, and a lot of landowners are doing this, is the hospitality. We've all heard of glamping and converting farm cottages into rental properties. There are new forms of there's investment going on in sort of more permanent, year-round and cool-looking glamping pods. There's also thinking going on, in how do we link that with, when we go somewhere, we all need to eat, so you can go out to local restaurants, but there is something about eating in nature. We all love barbecuing or whatever. How can we take that outdoor dining to another step? Now, it might be that we, bring in a sort of whole veg boxy type thing to the pod, and there's recipes, and there's the barbecues or outdoor cooking things where you can just cook up things. It could be that there's quite a lot of developments in farm locker technology where you can go there and you can pick up food which you want. So that could sort of be integrated into natural places. One of the areas where I see a great opportunity is in is in what in the urban setting is called micromobility. We're seeing these scooters start appearing in some of our cities. Electric bikes, of course, are appearing. And this really creates some quite exciting opportunities to extend the visitor experience beyond walking or beyond driving around in a safari vehicle. We'll rent a scooter. We know how to do that. There's off-road scooters starting to appear. There's these really nice sort of hybrid mountain cargo electric bikes coming onto the market, and landowners can rent fleets of these and then rent them out. But with this, they can you can start putting self-guided trails onto them. So you buy something to go onto your mobile phone, and that goes onto it, and it takes you around, and it's linked to GPS, so it pings it up. So it's almost like you might go to a gig or whatever, or the theatre, and you buy your program. You can add that to it, but it's a very much of an interactive, self-guided digital program. So I think there's real opportunities there to extend this visitor experience with developments in e-bikes and e-scooters, and that makes it very inclusive. And it also, maybe it's sort of, I don't know about you, but sometimes when you're walking around and you're walking around with a family, you think, oh God, how far is it going to be? And then there's a hill you really want to go up, or you're going down a hill and you're thinking, oh, I've got to walk back up. It's sort of there's that psychological, well, e-mobility takes all of that out of it. I think going back to those themes of assembly, for land managers working, looking at developing rewilding enterprises, there's a lot of things already out there which you can integrate. There's booking software there, so you don't have to sort of invest in setting up all of your own websites to do that. You just have plugins to do that, and you rent that as a service. As we're all aware, there's all these parking apps around, so you can easily charge for parking over an app base, or if you're making your area more accessible for electric cars, you can charge out your electric car hookup in there on that. So there's all of this sort of stuff coming in, which you can sort of assemble these visitor experiences. And again, this is an area which we get into in EcoSoulisco. I mean, I've worked for a long time in my past life in tourism and visitor, and it's a real area where we can sort of develop a new nature tourism. And I think there is, it's nice to reflect on past eras of outdoor recreation. So, in my mind, that started way back in the 18th century when the landscape gardens came in, and these practices of walking through allegorical landscapes and, seeing nature and landscape as a place of cultural discussion, talking about developments in science, developments in technology it would be nowadays, political issues and what have you. Rewilding embeds all of that, or embodies, and maybe embeds, some of that as well. And also, of course, in those times we had the Romantics, where there was these, there was all about these sort of bodily interactions with nature and the aesthetic of the sublime, which may have been a bit fearful at times, but also may have been, just sort of, spiritual at times. So we have those histories. I think some of that's been lost a little bit, because probably that was replaced maps in it was the next era, if you like, was in the late 19th century, when the rise of natural history and railways and all of these big debates about Darwinism and what is out there and God's creation. Was it God's creation, or is it evolution? Let's go and study this for true. And it was a craze of the time, going out and recording things and identifying things and classifying things and discussing things. And that's led through to modern traditions of natural history and birding and so forth. But they're a little bit niche, actually, nowadays. Of course, also in that era, maybe a bit later, coming into the early 20th century, we had all the walking and access movement, which is very much part of us. But then in the 90s, we had this sort of third wave, if you like, of outdoor recreation, which is sometimes called a more adventure activities or thrill-based recreation, mountain biking, surfing, my goodness, co-steering, the zip wires that go ape, all of that way, sort of looking for a bit more of a thrill in it. I think it's interesting to think about whether in rewilding we can create a fourth generation of outdoor recreation, which can be sold as a service on rewilding sites. And what is that? I think there's a lot of interest now in mindfulness, in well-being. We do like our tech. We do like the more thrill-based things. Maybe we are looking to recapture that aesthetic of sublime. And maybe for people thinking about, or maybe what I suggest for people who are thinking about developing that area, is really looking outwards and bringing some creative ideas into how you may develop. I mean, you'll have your own creative ideas on it, but of course the markets are always linked to that, that flow between urban and rurally based people. So I hope that's been a sort of useful overview and introduction to thinking about investing in rewilding, or how we can turn rewilding into a revenue generating proposition and an investment opportunity. And I hope what I conveyed is that there's a huge amount of potential here, and there's a lot of people thinking about it, but we haven't quite cracked it yet. And maybe that's the invitation for us as a nation, as a community, to work together to do something pretty amazing. I mean, could you imagine if we can make rewilding investable, and suddenly it starts scaling, and suddenly we've got, and then we're moving towards this new, hopeful, empowering, and positive environmental narrative. That's what gets me up in the morning, and I hope it will enthuse you too. Thanks very much.